There are those who speak and those who listen. But every so often, someone shows up who does both with uncommon purpose and an open notebook in hand. Nicole Banks is a power connector, a woman whose network doesn't just span industries, it sparks movements. For more than 2 decades, she's solved problems others run from, built what others said couldn't be done, and highlighted the wisdom of giants, one page at a time. This is Nicole's Business Notebook, a curated circle of brilliance, a behind-the-scenes pass to the strategies, stories, and secrets shared by the experts she calls friends. It's not just a show, it's a blueprint for those bold enough to build. So settle in, because the notebook is open.
Hi, it's Nicole Banks with Nicole's Business Notebook, and we are here working with subject matter experts from the greater Phoenix Valley and beyond to learn what we don't know, and tips and tricks to help us do better business together. This week I have Jon Bui here. He is from the Negotiated Apology Project, and he teaches people how to say sorry. So Jon, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of the show.
Yeah, Nicole, thank you for having me.
Yeah, 100%. So, obviously from the sizzle, you teach people how to apologize and how to say sorry.
That's right.
Of all the things in the world, why are you called to do that?
Man, called to do that, I think it's a pretty loaded phrase, but I agree. I do feel like it is my mission, right? It's something I'm very compelled to do because for me personally, growing up, it was something that was very lacking in my house. And thus, as I grew up from a kid to a young man to an adult, it was very lacking in my life. And it was very prevalent how it affected my relationships with people because I didn't have the ability or the context to actually verbalize or think about the methods to do so. And so once I kind of grew up and matured up and realized that, yeah, things have got to change, I became very fascinated with the dynamic of reconciliation.
Reconciliation is, I think a common theme in our lives, both personally and professionally. So do you help people in both realms? Do you have a passion of working with one group over the other?
I have a passion with working with people in general. So my methodology, you could use in a personal relationship, professional relationship, but it's all about people who are ready to help themselves, ready to help their relationships and, be able to bring, themselves to the next level as it pertains to getting more meaning and more closeness out of the people around them.
No, I love that. So you're saying methodology. So is there an actual way to apologize, like a step-by-step framework that you've built?
Yes, there is. So I model my process after the principles of negotiation. It's 3 stages, and throughout those 3 stages, there are 9 steps. My background is in the law. And so, in law school and in my, former career as a recruiter, a lot of negotiations, right? And negotiation is nothing more than trying to persuade someone to work with you, right? There's a methodology to it. There is an ends, there's a means to it. There's a logical flow, in being persuasive. And thus, I figure why not use that same kind of logical approach, in our everyday conversations, in our everyday conflict conversations.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach. When you talk about, needing to apologize for something, that's, emotionally led,
It is.
And can, depending on the situation, be very dramatic or loud, for lack of other words.
Mm-hmm.
A methodology seems like the last place in this emotional haywire opportunity. So how did you make that connection?
Well, like you just said, the emotional part is loud. It could be overbearing. And I think that's what is true for a lot of people. They listen to the loudness, right? But through that loudness, there are other aspects of the dynamic that they fail to observe. So my approach to the apology dynamic is an apology is nothing more than a negotiation for forgiveness, right? You are in this tumultuous place with someone and you want to get back to a place of not just peace, but a place of being forgiven. So we start there. You have a goal, right? And the question is, how do you get from point A to point B which is that goal. And once I started looking at the dynamic from that standpoint, I was able to kind of start building based on what the desired outcome is, and thus the methodology to get there.
No, I love that. Obviously I am not in law and that whole bit, but when I think of law, I think of, it's essentially it's learning how to argue. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of the opposite, negotiating for a result, that, is forgiveness. That seems to me like two different things. So how did you kind of meld those two together to build your methodology?
I think the idea that lawyers are taught to argue is a little bit of a misnomer.
Okay.
To all my lawyer friends out there, we would prefer to say that we are trained to be persuasive. Right?
Tomato, potato. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, we're trained to be persuasive, right? Like some people will say like, well, you're arguing, right? Because you want someone to side with you or you want a certain outcome. And that is certainly true. But persuasiveness is one of the vehicles that you use to actually get there. So thinking of an apology through that lens, the persuasion lens, not necessarily argument, right? It will make a lot more sense. Like you said, it could be tomato. But I don't see it as, I don't see what I was trained to do as just simply arguing, and I think that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love the clarification. Always here to learn, and that whole bit, and to expand. So, you went through law school. You had an incredible personal story and journey that you've shared in some of your recent speeches. Can you kind of allude to that and how that may have helped you to kind of get where you are, and why you feel called to do what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we started, I kind of alluded to, not really knowing how to apologize and it affecting my relationships. And I think that's speaking pretty broadly, right? I think most people have been in those kind of situations. And I think we all have. Interpersonal conflict is something that's universal to everyone. No one goes through their entire life without being in a situation where they have to take accountability. But if I had to be specific, right, I've been in all sorts of trouble with all sorts of people in my life, right? I've lost friends, I've lost romantic partners, I've disappointed my family members to the point of like broken trust that had to like claw back. I've been in trouble with the law. So, having been in these situations, you understand what it means to want forgiveness from the people you care about, the people you've worked with, the society that you live in, the community that you share with others. You know what it's like to desire that forgiveness. And once the desire is there, right, at least the knowledge that you want things to be different, I think that's the best first step for people to truly then find a path to manifesting that desire for forgiveness. And that's what happened to me, right? I was just tired of being a fuck up. Now, the caveat is I'm going to continue fucking up. And I don't think anyone's going to necessarily stop continuing fucking up. Yeah. But it's not about like what you do to fuck up. It's all about what you are going to do moving forward in the context of the ways you've messed up or you've hurt people.
Right. Mm-hmm. Just knowing your story and that whole bit, I think that really lends credibility. It's not like you're some golden boy who was like,
oh, hell no. No.
No, so I appreciate that it's that real sort of approach, that lived in, sort of methodology. And so I commend you for, wanting to do something about your circumstance and, making, those steps and, that progress that you've made. I think it inspires your keynotes and what you're doing to share your mission and your story. And I think that's amazing. Kind of left turn, we normally think about interpersonal conflicts when, we're talking about our personal lives, romantic, family, and all of those things. But, here on Nicole's Business Notebook, we're really kind of focused on entrepreneurship, business owners, and that whole bit. So how does what you do affect somebody in business?
Well, I would say what I've done has been very attractive to small business owners just because there is so much less leeway for a left turn to occur, right? In a big company, when the hammer falls down, like, yeah, sure, things are bad, but they have money for PR, right? It's big companies are big enough to throw someone under the bus. Small businesses, entrepreneurs, you kind of don't have that leeway. You are your brand, right? Your reputation is your brand. Even if you are an LLC and technically, your personal finances cannot be touched by, things that go wrong in the LLC. At the end of the day, your reputation is not untouchable, right? So I'm the only person in my LLC. I'm not untouchable. I am my brand. So for entrepreneurs, small businesses, there's a lot less leeway. And thus, we're more cognizant of the way we carry ourselves, or we should be more cognizant of the way we carry ourselves and our brand. And that's why what I do has attracted so many small business folks, because it's proactive training for them in case they ever need this particular skill set in their day-to-day circumstances.
I love that. Obviously I advocate for everybody to come through the negotiated apology project and hear what you have to say kind of firsthand. But for those who may be interested, can you give 2-3 tips for an entrepreneur that might be able to help them to deal with their interpersonal relationships better in business?
Yes. God forbid you're ever in a situation where you have to, do a public apology or, have to deal with talking someone down from a situation where, things have blown up. But the first thing I think most people should recognize when you're doing an apology is that there is not an equal playing field, right? The power dynamic between the parties of who is the wrongdoer and who is the victim of a harmful act, it's not an even playing field as far as the conversation goes. Now, one party holds the burden to persuade the forgiveness, right? And that would be the person who did wrong. And the other person, the person who suffered the harmful act, the victim, they hold the power to forgive. And if you notice, one of these parties has a lot more power than the other. One is burdened, and one has unilateral power to dictate how the apology interaction ends. And so I say this because I point out this power dynamic because I want people to understand that you need to come into the conversation understanding your role and what hill you have to climb as the person giving an apology. A lot of people walk into apologies kind of laissez-faire, and they're not necessarily taking their role seriously enough. And this is how people shoot themselves in the foot, not because they intend to, it's precisely because they don't intend anything that they end up in a situation where the other person's like, all right, clearly you don't really care. And thus, the relationship will be impacted on some level by an unsatisfactory apology.
Yeah, no, I think that's crucial. I obviously have sat through some of your speeches and the whole bit.
Yes, you have. Nicole's actually sat through my very first workshop. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It was great.
But I'm just here to shill you because it was actually Nicole who told me, well, what are you waiting for? Why not just do a workshop? Why not just get started? And it clicked for me why don't I do it? So I just want to give her flowers.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will not spoil it, but I will say that everybody should. But one of the non-things I think I can talk about that you went through in those trainings was you can take a pause. It doesn't need to be a one conversation. And a lot of business owners are so stressed about getting to that outcome, getting the forgiveness, moving forward, and that whole bit. I think that may be something that they might not understand. Can you expand more about kind of how you came up with that and how that could benefit an entrepreneur?
Sure. And what Nicole's referring to is when you're having, an apology conversation, sometimes you need to take a break, right? You could take a 10-minute, let's go do lunch. Let's sleep on this and reconvene in the morning. You don't have to finish the conversation all in one go. And the reason why I emphasize that is because the conversation is going to be highly charged. People are usually in this situation and they're going to be emotional, and your level of energy is going to affect your perception, right? It's going to affect
100%.
Yep. It's going to affect the way you perceive the other person. It's going to affect the way you're perceiving their words and the way you are receiving their words. So if someone is being worn down in a conversation, they are more likely and more prone to intake information erroneously. And if that were the case, you would want to put them in a situation where they can recharge their battery and diminish, that possibility for erroneous reception, so that they could then actually take in what you mean to say. Because if you're gonna mess up an apology some way, right, it might as well not be something as asinine as just someone simply not being able to understand what you're saying because they've glazed over. And that's why breaks are so important.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those back to basic things that, obviously it makes sense, but, I didn't really think about or, any of that. So for entrepreneurs, having those difficult conversations, is something that they might not be well versed in. Mm-hmm. Besides practice, which, we'd never want them to actively have to apologize and have that practice. How would you have them work this skill or to be able to kind of understand, where their words land better?
I think in today's society, right, in leadership, communication is everything. Communication truly is everything. And for entrepreneurs, that is triply true.
Yeah.
Right? Your ability to convey what is in your mind into the mind of other people with as little static and interference as much as possible, especially when the conversation is heavy in the context of things having gone wrong. It's especially important to truly get your message across. Being cognizant and just being very aware of what words you choose, how you choose to use it, in what setting you use it, especially when the conversations are going well, right? Especially when it's a normal conversation, being aware of, word choice and communication choice, it is going to help you a lot when you have to have not as great conversations. That's my 2 cents on that.
I love that. You're responsible for how you're received. And
Absolutely.
I think, especially in an apology, it's even more critical if you biffed it the first time to get it right the second time. And to have that retrospection and the whole bit. And I don't want to give everything away, and your methodology and, all of that. But another thing that I really liked is that you actually said to plan it out, to think about it beforehand, think about how you want it to go. And that sort of work through can lead to a smoother, more eloquently delivered, and better received. What made you kind of go back to the basics on that?
Well, as one of my favorite founding daddies once said, Ben Franklin, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, right? If you want to go buy a car, would you not do your research beforehand?
Oh, I go to 12, not just 11. Yeah. I go to 12.
Yeah. If you were going to go into a situation where you knew you were going to have a back and forth conversation with someone and you're trying to get them to see things your way or trying to work with them towards a middle ground, you are going to do a lot of prep work before you are in that situation. So why not an apology? Right? If you want something from someone, in this instance, forgiveness, would you not create a strategy to try to get that conversation into that area? And that is why it's so, like you said, it's basic, right? It should be intuitive, but for a lot of folks, it's not, And this, again, is where the noise of the emotion comes in. People don't think very rationally when they allow themselves to be overly consumed in the noise of the emotional aspects of what's afflicting them. And I get it, right? I've been there. I empathize with folks who have messed up so badly and are so worried about, the outcome or the fallout of what's happened that it makes them lose all sense. I get that. I've been there. But you have to think about what's best for you. And what's best for you in that situation is not to freak out and be in your feelings, what's best for you in that situation is to strategize towards the outcome that you want.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, is strategy. And so, kind of leading into my next question, you teach people how to say sorry. That is a strategy in itself, and you're doing it in a lot of different ways. So can you tell us how you're teaching people how to say sorry?
I do workshops. I do workshops and seminars throughout Phoenix, and I'm expanding. Hopefully I'll be doing a couple of other cities in Arizona. I prefer to do in person because there are certain things I do.
They're amazing.
Thank you. To truly drive across the points and the skills that go into truly mastering the ability to say sorry. But that's currently how I'm doing it.
I am always Jon's hype girl. It's what I do. And so there's some other ways too. You have spoken to me about potentially being a mediator type of influence. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So in my business, I do my workshop. I do keynote speeches for folks who maybe want something more short, something more aspirational, rather than technical mediation. I've created the world's first mediation program around, delivering apologies. Essentially just being a third party who is assisting both sides truly get out their themes and stories as it pertains to the conflict, so that the big picture is on the table. And then the parties know, all right, here are the puzzle pieces. How do we put it into place in order to find the right solutions? So that's something I'm very excited about.
Yeah, that's amazing. So in that sort of vein, is it, are you the love doctor and you're doing it, personally? Are you helping, business partners to, figure out what they're doing? Is it kind of everybody that you're willing to help? Who's your target client, I guess?
That is a tough question because apologies are so universal, right? It is, or the need for an apology is so universal. It's not one specific demographic or type of person who needs it more than the other. People just need it when they need it. So I am more than happy to help anyone who is ready to help themselves. And that is the main thing, right? I became aware of this ability of mine to have these conversations when I was ready. And so I help people who are ready, who have the desire to change, have that change manifest.
I love that. I mean, and I think, it's, to go through this process and to go through your methodology to say sorry, there is, some personal development processes that need to happen for you to, take that perspective, to take that breath, to take that break, to go through your process. So, when you say, people that are ready, I can definitely see with how you do things, how that would be important. But you also work, on the workshop side with corporations to, kind of deal with their personnel too, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah, so I attract a lot of companies and businesses that love the idea of a cohesive, strong work culture. Now, there's a big difference in an organization that claims to have a work culture, a good, strong work culture, and one that actually has, a good, strong work culture. So what I do is teach, human kindness, accountability that comes with human kindness. And companies that tend to have a lot of interpersonal conflict are the kind of places where people usually come and then they leave, right? And there's a cost associated with that. Mm-hmm. There's always obviously the money cost of having to find new people, train, hire, and then the indirect money cost of having a brain drain on losing experienced folks to random office nonsense. But then there's also the reputational costs, right? If a company is hemorrhaging dozens of people, small company, hemorrhaging dozens of people a month, and the word gets out that why is everyone leaving company X? That kind of damage could be worse for that company than just simply the money loss in the turnover. So building strong work cultures, building accountable work cultures is something that I'm also very passionate in, because it makes people happier doing something in a place they have to be for statistically a lot of their lifetime.
Right. So, you kind of got to there, so I'll ask the question. What are some tips to increase work culture?
Invest in the people, right? I think people are most invested in what they do and where they are when they find that they have a sense of belonging, when they feel that the people around them care, or at the very least see them for who they are, right? Yes, for the most part, people go to work to make a living, but it doesn't mean they can't enjoy being there either, right? And people will gravitate to places where they feel like they belong.
Right. I love that. For me, I think I try and be people's hype girl and, all of that and kind of lead with that energy. I think businesses should do the same. I think that they
I think so too.
Really, kind of not necessarily put their people on a pedestal, but celebrate every win, sing from the rooftops, and show that, the positives, can make up for those hot conversations and those things. There's that balance there that I think is sometimes lacking.
I definitely agree. With that sentiment.
That's awesome. So for me, there's obviously a lot of ways to work with you. You have the workshops, you can do the corporate stuff, you can do the, mediation and, all of that kind of stuff. This is obviously a, interesting time for you and transition and, all of that as you're rebranding and, kind of putting in, both feet forward and moving. So what's your goals for the rest of 2025?
Man, I don't really have any macro goals, to be honest. I started this project with the idea that if I could help at least one person, then it would have been worth it.
Okay, well,
thank you. And I think that's my North Star, right? It's just to help people. Dolly Parton said something along the lines of, if you just worry about doing the right thing today, the rest of the universe will have its way of figuring things out for you. So yep. I'm just focused on what I have to do on the day-to-day to make sure I make a positive impact. And then whatever energy I put out there, I know it will come back.
Yep, I love it. Super excited to see what you have coming down the pipe and, these different workshops. If you have the opportunity to see him in person, definitely recommend taking the time. I've alluded to some of, these things that he does through it, but I will say, as corny as it is, it changed my life. And he's like, yep. Mm-hmm. So, yep, you did get your one person. So, mission accomplished. But, saying sorry is hard.
It is.
And to have that be your mission and to have people do that better is something that I commend, amazingly. So anything, obviously, I can do to support, as I do. But, how do people work with you? Who are your target clients? Like, who do you want to reach out?
I have a website, thenegotiateapology.com. If you feel like you are ready to change, just holler.
Short, sweet, to the point. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the business sort of frame, are there any sort of mic drop nuggets, wisdom that you can leave for us, for an entrepreneur or business person, maybe considering that they need to say sorry or starting the process to figure out what they should do?
Yeah, entrepreneurs, well, yes. The number of people you meet in your life are going to be finite, and relationships are not clothing that are meant to be just discarded at the first sign of wear and tear. It is going to be a lot more fulfilling to be able to have that ebb and flow of maintenance, of fixing your relationships, and continue to derive meaning from having a relationship with someone, than to simply duck and dodge at the first sign of trouble and then believe that you could somehow replace that relationship with something else. The more work you put into your relationship with someone, the more it's going to matter. And you are going to be greater than the sum of the parts of yourself and the people that you surround yourself with. So if you're ever in a situation where it feels like it's insurmountable, just know that it's never too late to apologize. And the work that you do to get from point A to point B forgiven, it is going to drastically change you, it's going to change them, and thus it's going to change the sum of the parts of who you and they are.
I love that, and apology is a powerful thing.
It is.
And I really love that you talked about the value of relationships. When it comes to me and how I do business and, I'm a power networker that brings people together, I'm managing all of these countless relationships. If I was a wrecking ball or had a heavy hand and, that whole bit, I obviously wouldn't have, the success that I've had. So I love that wisdom. Thank you, Jon, so much for being here, sharing your knowledge, sharing, your, wanting to change the world one apology at a time. And love that I'm part of your getting your mission done. So I love that. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for creating a space for me.
Yep. Hey, always your hype girl.
All right.
Awesome. All right, so this is Nicole Banks again with Nicole's Business Notebook, where we are talking with subject matter experts that are affecting entrepreneurs in the greater Phoenix Valley and beyond, where we can learn to be kinder, to do better, apologize more often. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Nicole's Business Notebook. Subscribe and follow for more tips, insider secrets, and hard-earned wisdom so that we can all do better business together. See you next time.